Our children are living in times where polycrisis is a reality. We didn't live in those times. You cannot deliver the same educational system that was delivered in the past to our children and expect that they will have a better future. The parenting journey is about building a relationship with your child that is strong and beyond marks. You will have access to your child in the most tricky years.
Two founders walking together with Satish Manchikanti and Ajit Sivram. Execution is not a hustle. When you grow people, you grow everything. Two founders walking through.
Can a school turn children into everyday change makers? Today we have with us Shrija Iyer, our very first guest who we both absolutely love and adore. Thank you so much for joining us today, Shrija. Shrija is the founder of Sparkling Minds Global School. Over the last 15 years, she has built a school that is incredible, that we are both huge fans of. Our kids also go to the school. And I remember walking into Sparkling Minds more than a decade ago and having that first conversation with you. I think just the depth of your journey, of your understanding of education is why we're here today and we want to have this conversation with you. But before we get into Sparkling Minds, before we get into all of that, we'd love to hear a bit of your journey. We know all the LinkedIn highlights of MBA from ISB, Harvard educated, all of that. But we'd love to hear a bit of your story of how Sparkling Minds began and your journey to that.
Thank you so much. And I'm really excited to be here too. Love the journey the two of you are walking. And like you said, so almost a decade-old association. Love all the three kids and the work that we do with them. I think I would like to start with me as a student a little bit. I did well in school.
No surprises there.
I did well in school, and it's something that many people don't talk about themselves. Every day felt like some kind of an adventure. It was joyous. You want to study, you study. You do dance, drama hai, newspaper you want to write. Everything that was available was sampled, tried. And I found joy in many of those things as I went along. I felt uniquely different walking that journey, but I was happy. So I did it. I did well in the exams also. And as our times would have it, engineering, medicine, right? So I did walk the engineering path. Both my parents are engineers. And I was very clear that I wanted to do the kind of engineering that they did. I was very inspired by the work they did. In fact, I went to the same college, the same department. They studied in. They both had a love marriage. So that was very exciting for me. Now, that journey led me to first placement out of campus in hardware. At that time, everybody was going to software. I'm like, yes, this is really done. I land in the first job that I had, I landed at Wipro VLSI, and the buses come into that Electronic City campus, 60 of them, and with people getting down like little ants. And I remember standing there day one, feeling like I don't belong. And that was the kind of crisis I had never had. And it's interesting to say that because I am a Fauji bacha. Like I grew up in a Air Force environment, traveled across cities. So I took pride in the fact that I can go belong anywhere. I loved my bosses, I loved the work, but I was not happy. Something inside me felt like a vacuum, and I stayed with it. I think that courage comes from my mum. Okay, so I remember telling her when I was a very little child, okay, that in summer holidays it's boring. She said, Tirupati. Return it, volley it back. And I'm like, what does that mean? Figure it out. Stay with the discomfort, I think, comes from the family nurture quite a bit. And when you've hit success with that, you stay with it more. So that led me to stay with it. A couple of things that I discovered as I walked that path is that I loved all the experiences where I could meaningfully contribute to something, where I could make meaning out of things that I was a part of. And I found immense joy in solving problems. And collaborative environments excited me. It has to be collaborative, cannot be competitive. It cannot be one-upping each other in any way. It cannot be siloed too much. I chanced upon an ASER report around that time. This is 2005. I'm like, I did well in school. I was decently privileged. Middle class background, KV is a decently privileged environment. And I am not happy. These kids are not being served. Education is a good problem to solve. It rang something in me. And here we are in 2025. Obviously, it stayed. Didn't make a switch immediately. So that journey is what is the ISB, a little bit of Harvard journey. It was very clear that this has to be a sustainable path. So how do you transition from being a hardware systems engineer to becoming an entrepreneur, an educator in the most systematic way? ISB has a 1-year curriculum. International professors coming, like really amazing curriculum. I'm the 5th batch of ISB, so very early years of ISB. And a specialization in entrepreneurship and marketing, which kind of was exciting, right? Because I said, okay, I'm going to learn. Little did I know what that means. I'm going to learn how entrepreneurship and marketing works. But I was also very clear that I'm also going to build a network. The people who are coming there are going to come with similar ambitions, and having them as colleagues and peers is going to add value. Went on to do a strategy role in semiconductors post that. I moved on from there because the bug was there, right, to an edtech company. Okay, it was doing very early years education technology, aiming to serve a technology solution to teachers to make learning interesting. I was like, this sounds good. I will get access to learning about education. I was very committed to figuring it out. So I joined them as director of marketing. And just coming from semiconductor hardware background, they were building an entire stack. Very exciting. I said, I get the product, I get the market, I will do this for free, right? So I'm coming. And I really chased them down and got that job. When I transitioned, I knew that I was going from a company of a large company, 3,000 people, to 300 in Intel, where I was, to about 300 in Cyprus, to 30 in the company. It was a curve. I went in thinking I will give this product and train teachers on using the product to make learning joyous, right? But I realized that teachers' mindset needs work. Slowly, I realized the system needs work. And I remember clearly when I recognized that was, I'm standing in this school and the teacher is teaching the children. Blackboard has become whiteboard. She is still reading out of the textbook and children are completely disenchanted. 2 of them were jumping out of the class. Which is okay, but they're third grade children. So what leads to children being disenchanted so early? I think it was an epiphanic moment. Nothing has changed. Nothing will change unless systems change.
Absolutely.
Changing teachers, preaching and saying you make it interesting is not going to be enough. So the world has changed significantly. There are skills that children need.
Yeah.
Right? So this is a short transition to my journey, and this is what led to the starting of Sparkling Minds.
Love that. Love that. I think, unlike you, I didn't do well at all in school. I really struggled. I didn't enjoy it. Yeah. And one thing common is we also came across our reports. And just from my journey of struggling through school and looking at, again, the ASR report inspired us to start you and I. And about 8 years ago, when it was time for Jenny and I to say, okay, where do we put our son? And if Jenny and me were very Excel sheet, do our research, do pros and cons. So we did our rounds, looked at all the schools. Jenny was very keen that we look at the whole Reggio Emilia way of teaching. And we zeroed on 2 schools. One was in Indiranagar. And to be honest, it had all the bells and whistles, very fancy, the dream school you want to send your child to. Then we came and spent an hour with you. It was in the evening at the Kalyanagar preschool.
Yeah.
Small place, didn't have any bells and whistles, but 1 hour with you. And we were completely sold on your vision, on what you're building and what you're trying to accomplish through Sparkling Minds. And I think the world needs to know more. So if you could dwell a little bit, what you're creating through SM, Sparkling Minds is, I think it's more than a school by definition.
Yeah, thank you so much. So yes, we are sitting almost 15 years since that journey. So I stopped at the point that I moved into education and started Sparkling Minds because I thought world was going a certain way and education systems need change. And I wasn't sure at that time that I wanted to start a preschool or a school, but I'm like, skills children need. So our journey started with an after-school program. And this was a program where we used to work with children on thinking skills, communication skills, emotional skills, decision-making skills. And we were basing it on multiple intelligences. And we're very clear that we want to build this ecosystem out to give them something that typical schools don't provide. And parents who really care about this work should come and take this up. And every child deserves to have a voice. Every child deserves to have the autonomy, the agency to express what they think, what they feel. And that was a dream run, okay? So about 3-4 years since we started that, we created games. We have a suite of 25 games around that. One thing which stood out was children would transform. We are not doing chess to improve child's logical thinking. We are not doing taekwondo to improve the child's confidence. So what happens at surface level, people say taekwondo skills and they also get confidence is their assumption. We were actually working on simulated circumstances where the child would be like, hey, role playing a failure situation, and then we walk through a thinking routine to figure out how I can flip it, right? We would show parents that this is happening, etc. But the output-oriented nature of our thinking, how do you make children's thinking visible I landed upon a course in Harvard. It's a program called Future of Learning, run by the Harvard Project Zero group. And Howard Gardner was chairing it, who is the father of multiple intelligence. I was like, can't get better than this. Right? Although it was a week-long program, I came back with a lot more from that entire workshop. And one of the things that I came back with was Howard Gardner going Reggio. Right? And Reggio Emilia is the way in which multiple intelligences is the most deeply embedded in a community-driven ecosystem. And I started looking up about that preschool methodology. Before that, when you're running something like an after school, people are like, you run preschool in the morning. Why would you only run after school on the weekends? It's space, it's inventory. And like my business sense understands that, but my entire being was not resonating with, hey, I'm doing these deep skills with children and preschool demands you to go teach the children ABCD. Right? I'm not going to do that. But researching and figuring out what Reggio Emilia inspirational pedagogy philosophy would look like, I was inspired. I was sold. I came back, told the team, we are starting a preschool. It took us about a year and a half.
Wow.
So I'm like, this is exactly what we are doing in our after school program. So the whole Reggio Emilia philosophy actually anchors deeply on child-led. So what is it that the child is thinking? What are their lived experiences? And what is the context in which this child is actually living? Everything matters. Parent is the first teacher. Environment is the third teacher. And the facilitator is actually the teacher is a facilitator, not the only bearer of wisdom in that entire space, right? This beautiful trilogy really worked. Children really inventing their reality, making meaning out of things, collaborating. It is rooted deeply in social constructivist philosophy too. So it's a very interesting, layered way of being, and it just brought me alive. So that is the genesis of preschool. This is 2014. And I think that because we had some reputation in that market, as we were grappling with where will these children go? Because they graduate from the preschool, where will they go? Will they have the same sense of agency, autonomy? Will they discover things? Parents are also asking us these questions. In the meanwhile, the next bunch of parents sat down in front of me and said, either you start school, okay, or we are sitting here. And I think it was easy to convince me to some extent because I was already on the path that where are these children going?
Sure.
And how will you activate the potential in these children? So that led to the start of the school. The parents deciding that this is worth it. They said, shed banao. You create a shed, we will... Our school. But yeah, thankfully the person I met for the school, etc., he said, I'll give you something better than a shed to operate. And the school itself is operating on that philosophy that children discover meaning in life. Why should children go to school? To discover meaning in life, to discover a sense of direction in life, to discover that we together are in this journey. So that interconnectedness, the sense of community, all of which in a typical academic environment is actually taught in the opposite way. The other person is a versus, right? You're competing, you're comparing. You are not with that person in any way. Collaboration is an afterthought in many cases. Community is a jargon word sometimes because you want to bring people together, but you don't know why you're doing that. Parents are either serving or served in many ways. So there's transactional interaction, which we didn't want to do at any point. And we really genuinely wanted to build a community which came from a place of gratitude, and we operated out of a place of gratitude, which was essential if you wanted children to look at the big problems to solve. And then the question begins is that where does syllabus sit in the scheme of things? Because how do you ensure, because it's a school now, you need to ensure children learn a bunch of skills, but school does have affiliation authorities, and that's what is in people's minds, right? And many a time schools end up serving that as the goal, that, hey, we will cover the syllabus. And I started seeing what must have gone wrong in my journey, because if you catered only that, where are you discovering yourself? So that in overall, right, becomes the philosophy of how do we bring child to the center who can then be a discoverer, a capable nurturer of the ecosystem and the ecosystem nurture. So parents are one angle, edge of that thing. The facilitators who work with the child becomes another edge. The community of all the children, all the parents, all the adults who work with the child are also part of this ecosystem, right? Every driver, every support staff, whoever touches the child's life in many ways impacts them. And then you have a context which is very important. Our children are living in times where polycrisis is a reality. We didn't live in those times. Our children are living in times when the speed at which something is expected from you, given to you, is unimaginable. We can't imagine getting groceries in the time that we get, right? You have to get up, you have to go, you have to buy. Things won't be there. The whole abundance that has actually come into the system is their reality. So is the crisis. So you cannot deliver the same educational system that was delivered in the past to our children and expect that they will have a better future.
Absolutely.
So that's a very important thing for us to consider. And then we found the right place for syllabus right outside this circle, which is, it is the consolidated knowledge of the last 200 years. It's not the wisdom of entire humanity in it. Children need it. I will never deny the children don't need it, right? But they need to discover the purpose and the meaning and pull it into their reality, and also open up to wisdom that comes from other places. Communities hold wisdom, people hold wisdom, relationships hold wisdom, the land holds wisdom. And how you approach the problems from within you, right? What calls you, that there is so much wisdom in all of this. When children are able to discover that deeply is when you are really nurturing and educating the whole child. So whole child pedagogy is what we are actually working with children on, and around that sits the community, the context, the parents, the facilitators. Then there is space for learning sprints which actually anchor on syllabus. So we don't consider ourselves alternative, because I question that. Hey, okay, so there's mainstream and there is alternative. Who goes to alternative? Who can't fit in the mainstream?
Absolutely.
We are not reacting to something that exists. We are responding to what child needs. And hence, it's a progressive whole child pedagogy, but it needs design. It needs deep work in design to be able to curate and cultivate and do this work. So we can look at all of this and say, oh, this is great philosophy, oh, but this is too much work.
Yeah.
And that's the work that we have been doing for the past decade, right? That how do you design something so that it feels possible, it feels doable.
Absolutely love that. So much to unpack there. Almost like 15 years of wisdom in 5 to 7 minutes. When this term like child-centric learning, right? How does that actually work in a class? You've got 20 kids in a class. How do you have 20 child-centric learning experiences going on? And then why use the word facilitator? Why not teachers? Where is this guru shishya Indian heritage that you're brought up, or all brought up?
One is child centricity is a methodology in some ways, okay? And there is a philosophy of education that people work on. One is an essentialist philosophy, okay? So this is one of the oldest philosophy in education, that there is a truth, some fundamental truth to which you find your way, okay? Or I tell you and I show you the way, whatever. But there is an essential truth. The methodology is still not being questioned, right? So there's essentialism. Then there is spiritualism, where the child is being seen as the spiritual being and the teacher is the guide who is walking you through the path. And then there is constructivism, okay? So we are closer to constructivism that way from a thinking perspective, and seeing the child as this meaning maker in their life.
Interesting.
Okay, and the child centricity now can actually serve any of these things because it is the methodology of delivery. So you will see a lot of systems call themselves child centric, but what are they serving as the image of the child matters, and what is the child walking towards matters, right? So in our case, the child is a citizen of the world. So my image of the child when I'm in class as a facilitator is of a capable human being who is a citizen today, who has rights today. Right? That's the most fundamental understanding, that the child is a capable, curious individual. Now, let's look at from a social constructivism point of view. What are you really looking for the children to do? Their context, their lived reality is curriculum. Okay. So if, for example, children on the way back found a dead butterfly and they brought in 6 of them, not the whole class, 6 of them is peering at it very intently, that can become curriculum. And the facilitator can very quickly invite everybody, hey, you know what, Josh brought this butterfly in and they're all looking at it. Would you like to look at it too? And the children have space to say yes, no. Mostly they're interested. If you're actually looking at it together, you can put it up on a slide, right? You can actually dissect it. You can ask them, where do you think the butterflies come from? So you're basically guiding, walking, nurturing, and even as children are there, they might actually say, oh, look at the color of the wings. How does it have these 3 colors come together? Why is it dead? And they would ask such beautiful questions. Those questions then guide you into curriculum. And yes, this sounds like a preschool curriculum, but it can also be a primary grade curriculum. It can also be a secondary grade curriculum, because butterfly is life. And from life, you can connect to science and math and social sciences or anything for that matter. So the act of taking a child's interest and converting it into curriculum and connecting it to the syllabus and going beyond. Okay, that's something that we have built in as a process of thinking with the facilitators. And the facilitators are very mindful that if a group of children or a child said no, then there is space to negotiate and figure things out, because you are not working on me versus you in the class. They also get sufficient choices to take up. Do you want to express it in this way or that way? So they will figure it out. I want to draw, I want to make a clay model, I want to do this, I want to do that. And the facilitator's role is to teach the skills, but not guide what you need to do.
It's a skill, but not guide what you.
Yeah, so the child does need skills on how do you manipulate clay, how do you cut something, how do you work with that in your own ways. But you're not telling them, draw the wing like this. The representational work the child will do. When the child draws it, the facilitator will ask, what have you made? Why have you made this? Or the peer will ask, that's very interesting. Why did you choose this color? And that then becomes discovery of the child's inner world, because child will say, oh, that's because I thought mixing these two will give me green, but it's given me pink. And the child then goes on a path of discovery. The moment color mixing happens, the facilitator will be like, can I bring you modes of different kinds of mixing of colors? So next day she'll bring something called an invitation to play that we call in the school, and the children will play with it in different ways. The moment play is allowed, now it's yours on what you do with it. I just brought a material to the table that previously you people showed some interest in. Possible after today you're not interested? Fine, we'll put it aside, we'll do something else. But children generally very deeply play with things where they're not instructed to do certain things in certain ways. And the facilitator's role is to stay deep in not agenda. And this is a very Reggio Emilia approach. Something like Montessori, which actually sees children as scientists. Discovering fundamental truths will actually do something very different with child centricity. A typical Waldorf-Steiner methodology, which is very spiritualist in nature, will do something very different with the child centricity and do something very different because it's not just child centric. It is social constructivism additionally. So the purpose that it is serving and how it is serving goes together. And one of the things that I really love about that entire combination in some ways is that it responds to the original problem that we started with. Why should children come to school? So that they develop citizenship, so that they understand how agency and decision making works, how conflict and negotiation works.
So you talk about child centricity, but for all of us who grew up in, let's open chapter 4 on whatever
Speaking on Greek and Latin.
like how does a teacher or a facilitator balance that, right? Because in class 2, a student should have learned some whatever subtraction or whatever that is. How do you hold that tension? Because the butterfly example, the child leads that.
Yeah.
But a teacher also needs to get through, okay, I want them to learn subtraction.
Maybe phonics, right?
I think you talked about sprints, right? You talked through because for a lot of people, when they hear this, they're not able to connect with, so what actually happens in class?
Yes.
Is every day a new butterfly and in second day? What is the actual structure to the learning journey for a child?
Yeah. I think that's a really important thing. So given the social constructivism and the child centricity model, from a back-end process, in order to be deeply prepared for this experience, you cannot expect that you'll go into class and just some magic will happen. I think that's a misconception in experiential learning, that the teacher is just a operator in class and a solo operator in class. So something very important again comes from Reggio Emilia philosophy for us, as well as how I have learned design thinking and the work with the curriculum, is that you have to be a team. You're working together in the back end, okay? And there needs to be space to discuss and make meaning out of what children did or what their lived reality looks like. I'm going to give you 2 very solid examples. One started about 2.5 years ago for us, where we saw children complaining about the city quite a bit. Traffic, potholes, there is rain, this, that. And we're like, what might be our children's association with the city? So this is a reflective question that a facilitator and a team of facilitators are asking themselves based on their lived experience of children and that ecosystem. And we're like, we don't know. Mostly negative for sure, but we don't know. What are our associations with the city? Because you can't take something to children that you haven't reflected upon. So that journey for a facilitator is very important. I'll come to the syllabus point, because the syllabus can happen only anchored on somebody who is ripe and ready to learn something. So this readiness comes when I am exploratory, when I am deeply figuring something out. So we as facilitators, a team of facilitators, actually went on a journey to the city saying, hey, here are our maps, here are our thoughts. And then we went out in the city and came back with how we experience it as human beings. Before children, before anything. First, because we are used to textbook, like you said, syllabus, exams. We're not used to treating city as syllabus or a city as learning lab, right? As a learning material. So you have to go engage with it and bring it back. Then you have familiar environments, right? You say, hey, we gather data about, say, air quality. It can become a data handling exercise. We gathered water samples and came back. I will do scientific inquiry on this and I will turn it into a states of matter curriculum. I will bring this. So there is knowledge that gets connected to, but the child has a larger purpose to actually connect to it completely. So this connection making happens in the back end. It is same as I will not tell you what to make out of clay, but I'll teach you clay work. Same, I will teach you data handling and I will give you meaningful work to do on the data handling while also building mastery. I think in experiential learning, one of the things that people miss is that, hey, mastery is required because I can't think in higher order data, say powers, which is basically natural laws are sitting on powers, okay, powers and exponents, right? So I can't think in logarithm. I cannot think if I don't know basic algebra, if I don't know basic powers and exponents, if I don't know basic hops, which is multiplication. I have a lot of deep respect for how the knowledge that we call syllabus today was layered over the last 200 years with contribution from so many stalwarts in physics, in chemistry, in math, in sciences. And every single point, they were trying to discover truths because they were trying to figure out the next piece of the puzzle. So people who are trying to do this work using that knowledge, using that information, are doing something contextual, relevant, meaningful, collaborative for themselves. Why is school feeling different for the child? Why would you give all of this as history of science and say, study this, right? Should I accept Newton's law for granted? And I'm not saying that every single thing will be discovered, but I'm saying as long as a larger context of why I'm doing something, the child will say, hey, this is meaningful. I know somebody sought meaning and they discovered this because that thirst, that sense of purpose that starts to come for learning can be established. And the rigor, the quantum of knowledge should not be thrown away saying that it is irrelevant. That's our philosophy. That's how I look at it. And I love that rigor. I love the knowledge. The only issue is in the approach that you should somehow learn it and somehow later on use it. I'll give you another example. Fearful stuff for people. Integration and differentiation in 12th grade. 11th and 12th grade is, don't remind me, trauma.
Interesting. Ajit out now.
I get it. It stresses everybody, right? This is a context that I've been setting with children. If you look at all the concepts that you learn, right from series to circular functions to integration, differentiation. I'm specifically doing math because people are like, how can you gamify this? How can you find purpose in this? I'm like, you can. Because in that 11th and 12th grade math, you're actually teaching children how to model change through statistics and probability of that kind, how to measure change, how to understand patterns in change. That's your series, that's your stuff. But the way it is done in textbooks, the way it is delivered, you are being asked to learn a lot of semantics with no context. That's why the context that we do right from grade 1 really serves. So even if they don't see the full context, they begin to understand, oh, this will help me measure change. Then where can it help me measure change? Functions, for example, and this is during COVID. We just had our first 10th grade batch. So by then, the US curve had flattened out and India was still on the up curve, right? We were like, can you find parallels to figure out when will, it pan out and when can we come back to school, okay? So very excited, okay? They're modeling functions, they're figuring things out. They graphed it. They said 31st Jan, we'll be back at school. When we came back, 28th.
Wow.
We were back at school and we were like dancing because they did the modeling and I don't know, it turned out to be almost accurate. The issue here is that the world doesn't work like this with knowledge and information. You're right. In that space, it's a tenuous space because we are holding this. And if the parents and then just the next layer of community doesn't understand that this is important, no need to hold it, but at least that this is important, then it dies away. How do you learn? And how do you learn to learn? How do you ask? How do you say, I don't understand? To figure out, not to give up.
Yeah.
And that rigor and that syllabus helps us do that. We bring it into context through learning sprints. We design rigorously and we build capacity in facilitators to see a problem and they work together as a collaborative whole. So for example, when children went out into the city and they brought back problems, the language department said, let them write biographies of the places that they went as those places, right? And so much empathy flowed out of children. Biography was something that they were learning in syllabus. Right? Context was provided. So today our facilitator, you bring it anything. I will make it contextual, right? And that skill doesn't take too long to build. It's about 2-3 years of iterating through learning sprints. You can build that skill. right? So there is experiential learning in action. Basically, you're saying that there is a concrete experience that I do reflective understanding on. I abstract learning out of it and I apply. So there's a cyclical approach that we follow. This enables children to actually own it with a lot of intent and own it with rigor. So we are not minus rigor. I tell children rigor is required. Now, how you get to it can be contextual, but you have to put in the rigor to learn what needs to be learned. I think there is nothing in life that you get by not walking up the hill, not taking on that adventure. You will fall. The space is there. So when we are walking with children this journey, what is important for us to know is that it is a slightly ambiguous path. The syllabus provides a good guardrail. So we know, we call them floor levels, okay? We say, hey, we know at least this much is getting done. We use something called a rubric-based methodology where we say skills can also have some measurable process to check, is there quality at least that is being delivered? And what dimensions of skills are being delivered? So we do use rubric-based methodology, which enables us to do more than what the syllabus does, but also what the syllabus does.
Love that. I think at UNI, one of the values we hold very close and with our children, with our volunteers is be the change. And I love the fact that how you have this change maker journey for children. And I think that sentence, be the change, be is a critical word for us because be is about being and becoming. Right? And we really see that sort of happening at Sparkling Minds and how you're able to take children on that journey and help them discover how they can be change makers. One thing you mentioned that I found very interesting is, hey, how do you take children on a journey when you have not been? In that area, you have done amazing work with parents like us. You walk the talk. We have attended 6 weekends of workshops where you take time out, you come, you sit with us. And it's huge sacrifice on your part to be able to do that, but you're really putting your intention to work there. So if you're able to throw a little bit of light on how you work with parents, how do you bring them into this learning journey and also make them part of the whole process that children are going through?
Yeah, absolutely. I think parents are the most important part of this journey. And when you're talking about a child being able to discover themselves, the ecosystems that they're a part of need to hold that space for them to fall, to fail, to transgress, to come back in and be okay doing all of that, because you are not going to develop decision making skills outside of this ecosystem. That's a myth that people say, oh, the child should be in unsafe ecosystems to learn. I said no, in a safe ecosystem the child should learn decision making first, and then you let the child go there, do what they need to do, come back and reflect and learn. Muscle builds very differently. Why do entrepreneurs' children become successful entrepreneurs? Many a times because they've seen their parents do it in a safe lab-like ecosystem. They were not out there selling when they had to be learning, and they learned that additionally. So that kind of a safe ecosystem gets built only and only when parents are partners in the journey. So for me, it's the highest value to be able to spend time and do that work with parents. And unfortunately, because of the kind of systems that we've come and become a part of, transactional love is the love that we have learned. You do this, I will give you this. Or if you don't do this, I will do this. And fear has been modeled to us as children, and then subconsciously we end up modeling it with our children, right? Most parents do it unintentionally. There is absolutely no intention to hurt, but we don't know better ways. And for a child to actually develop a sense of agency, to see that they are capable human beings, in the dependent phase and interdependent phase that they are in with their parents, they need the space to be. That doesn't happen when you're transacting and you're dealing with fear a lot. And people are afraid that if you don't use fear, the child will become wayward, the child won't listen. The word discipline has a lot to do with fear, and we say, why don't you add self-discipline to it and flip this into empathy? And that's the work that we do with parents to see, can you forgive yourself for whatever journey you have walked? Not from a place of I have wronged, but whatever I am doing right now is not the best that it is serving my child and myself as a parent. And that the parenting journey is about building a relationship with your child that is strong and beyond marks, beyond outputs, beyond I will somehow set your career, you'll thank me for it 20 years later, right? It's not that. You're really building a very solid relationship with your child that will become the conduit for the love and wisdom to pass through. Right? You will have access to your child in the most tricky years. When you get to teenage, when you get to those places, you need access to the child to be able to pass on some of your wisdom, right? That you've developed with so much care. And that space is what we create in the parenting workshop. And I have been very fortunate to have parents come and spend that time despite the discomfort and difficulty, walk the path, question it, think about how to incorporate and change their practices ever so slightly, because I know the next day, Monday, I have different children back. I have children coming, running, hugging me. Thank you so much. Why? Because they don't know how to articulate it fully, but they know Papa has changed. Mama has changed, right? Now I can make mistakes at home. I think it's totally worth it, right? And it has built a sense of community in the space. It is not a mandatory program, by the way. We don't insist. No, so again, for me, it matters that you came on your own, right? It matters because then it is your purpose to do it versus another tick mark for the school. So that is a concept that we work with children and parents on. Is as long as you are able to see yourself, you can then fill the child's empathy bucket. You can make them feel seen, heard, whole. And when you do that and we do that, the ecosystem becomes safer. Nothing else matters for children as much as parents do. Even when they don't tell you, that's the real truth. Teachers, they will say, oh, I will listen to my teacher. Those are all strategies. Okay, those are all strategies. Don't fall for it. It simply means things like maybe I don't feel safe enough. Maybe I want to escape right now. Maybe you will not scold her, you'll scold me, you'll not scold her. Things like that. Okay, direct it to the teacher or the school. Those are the things that they're really saying. They're not really saying they don't love you. They love you. They want you to see them. You are their primary source of validation. And when parents know how to not transact on that love that they seek so badly, you don't put holes in that being. And that is what creates the whole human being, right? And for us, that's the greatest inspiration for us to continue doing that work and bring parents into that fold.
Love that. I think the two things you talk about a fair bit in the parent workshop. One is unconditional love, right? That's a term I very rarely hear anybody talk about. And I think the second thing you started off with is connection is your number one goal. I think as a parent who's brought up in the fear ecosystem and understands fear and knows how to leverage that, how does unconditional love, discipline, connection, how do they all stay within the same ecosystem of parent?
Now, what does unconditional love mean? Unconditional love means I love you no matter what. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to be anything. You don't have to deliver anything. You don't have to not make mistakes. You don't have to be the perfect kid. You don't have to do anything. Just because you are my child, you are born to me, I love you.
Wow.
So that's a given. Now, I can have disagreements with you.
Sure.
Which is fine. I will never withdraw love. I can tell you that this is not working out for me. I may have to step back on this conversation. I can hold you accountable with love. And I can question that the decision making that you're making, right, is making me lose trust on your decision making, not on your being. So the being is always intact. And then I am layering better decision making because I'm not transacting on this. We are on the same page. I care enough about your well-being as much as you do. So if you don't care, then you will actually sacrifice parts of you to win, to compete, right?
Yeah.
Going through an adventure or going through a hard part of the journey, you don't have to be bruised to actually walk a journey. You can be tired. You can feel hurt temporarily, right? But you know how to heal because you are always whole. You're always loved, right? That is a reservoir from where confidence stems from, right? Now, this child who knows he is loved will listen to reason. Will listen to a vulnerable emotional confession that the parent is making that, Bacha, I'm really tired today. I cannot read a story to you. Will listen because he knows it doesn't mean you don't love them. You get it? The children go here all the time. You are not here home early, you don't love me. You said no to this, you don't love me. That's their immediate transition that goes to, and after a point, they're not even asking this question. You don't love me. Because it's already sitting on tripped love. So if you constantly fill the love bucket, no, even when you're very angry, that's something that I teach you, right? The fire control strategy. And honestly speaking, if a child repeatedly breaches boundaries or something like that, when you are sitting on unconditional love, you shouldn't go into, hey, the unconditional love doesn't work. You should go into what's happening with the child.
Yeah.
There is something off. Nobody begins their day with malintention saying, I'm going to trouble my mother, I'm going to trouble my father, I'm not going to study, I'm going to break my future, I'm going to drop everything down, I'm going to trouble everybody around, I'm going to be the best bad person in the world. Nobody starts their day or ends their day like that. They get there. Something has happened in their inner ecosystem which has led to that, which already means they're not feeling whole. So if love is a given, you can work on the becoming. But if love is not a given, the being is hurt. And when the being is hurt, you are already like the parenting relationship is in jeopardy already.
Sure.
When you're talking about a child whose love bucket is filled, then the discipline is not about externally imposed, right? It is coming from somewhere within. And the child decides that, okay, I want to follow this pattern. I want to do this work because I care about my body. And there is a tenuous space between where the child decides this and still walking with the child there, right? Because children are not born with all the routine set up and everything. Even that journey, if you walk with empathy, saying, okay, why are you not able to do it? And the child is able to explain to you because I don't like it. You can then solve for it in some way or ask them how would you want to solve it, right? And the more you go into that kind of a space, the child realizes that whatever is their inner truth matters, and resolving for it can build new behaviors, can build relationship, can change ecosystems, and children walk that path. We have seen children walk that path. The reason I can say it with so much confidence is that as our children grow in the ecosystem, the amount of control that parents have to put in to kind of get children to do something significantly reduces. They own their work. They do way beyond their own work. They own each other, they go out into the city, they create impact. And when we send them out, so for example, yesterday, 2 groups of our children went in 2 directions to meet 2 government officials. 3 each went alone. And we are rest assured that they will not misuse that autonomy that has been given to them. And they're reporting back and they came back. And the government officials are in their own ways impressed. But we know it was a system that was built from core. So it is not one child. And it is not a lucky token that this particular child is doing it, that nobody else will do it. And as a system, if something is not working, we'll course correct for that child together with the parent. I think that's the strength that unconditional love, partnership with parents, and believing in the agency and autonomy of children and belongingness starts to build. So that's the work.
Love it. Yeah. I think I love that, right? Like the facilitator, the school ecosystem, the student, and the parent
Working
I think
together.
that 3-part harmony, I think, is magic and builds that almost safe space. And we've seen that personally in the journey, in the conversations we've had about our kids. I think it's not just theory. We've actually seen it work. So I think, quick question, when you zoom out now, right, there's this almost cocoon of this sparkling by that you're building. When you think of other schools, when you think of the larger schooling system in India, how does this translate to that? What are some things that other schools can maybe even learn from Sparkling Minds? Even what are baby steps?
Yeah.
How does
I think that's a very interesting question. For the past 4 years, we've been toying with how do we access a larger number of lives in some ways, right? And create impact. And it's never about creating another Sparkling Minds. I think that's not the point, right? The point is what part of what we do can be easily adopted in some ways or easily inspire another school or educator to do something. So I framed it as a couple of questions, right? So for me, one thing is, as an educator, as a leader in the space, do you know what your children's worries are and what problems are they facing in school, outside school? And is it part of your curriculum? Do you know what your teachers are struggling with? Is that part of your professional development? Do you know what your parents' biggest concerns are? And do you workshop around it? And do you look at what you are working with children as a community-driven learning space where school has a porous walls? Things can come in and the school's processes can work with it, not from a pedantic, this should happen this way, but let's try this together. Are you willing to be that porous? Which we do through something called Problems to Projects. It's a humanity-centered design model where any problems the community children is facing, we gather, map, empathize, we define, ideate, and children are able to move towards prototyping, solving, testing. It could be a social problem, it could be a product problem, it could be a workshopping issue, it could be any kind of ideas that show up. And we've seen that it starts to give agency to the community and to the children very differently. If I were to ask somebody that, are you thinking along these dimensions? How do you bring those problems in? Is there a process to work with it without shooting it in some ways? And then are you willing to let that change something in your ecosystem?
Very cool.
Yeah.
I think I have a similar question, but with the parents, right? Again, parents, on one side, they have this pressure, right? They need to turn their children into doctors and engineers, right? On the other hand, they do have this intention. Everything you talked about, I think if a parent hears it, they want that for the child. but they don't feel empowered to how do they take this journey. They don't have the framework, they don't have the tools. So parents who are watching it, if they have to take those baby steps, saying, okay, how do I nurture my child in this way? What are some of those baby steps, some of the basic things that they can do?
I totally agree with you. So there is a need for certainty that I know that my child will be okay. I know that things that I have built, the child will be able to use that and move forward. And there is also a need for connection, which is very deeply human, right? So when the child shuts you down, there is pain. There is deep pain that you experience. And I think many parents reconcile in this way, saying that at least I did that, which was at least something that I left for the child. And the child also then begins to say, okay, that's what they did. How do you marry these two things? Starts to begin with, I think, first question, if I were to talk to parents, is that what is your current image of your child? One of the biggest conversations when I have with parents is that when I say a child is a capable and curious individual, they're like, you're kidding me. I've neither seen capability nor curiosity, right? It must be coming from somewhere else. You must be talking about some other child.
We exchange.
Yeah, maybe your vision of children, you're delusional. So I get it. You need to be able to, in your gut, believe that every human baby is born with capability and curiosity, and even the act of shutting you down is a form of capability. Yeah, so when you see, okay, they're using it to do things which are causing disconnection, which must be causing pain, what do I do differently is what that starts to sit on. So what is your current image of the child and how can you walk towards the other one is the first question. The second thing that I would actually say is that measure in a day, how many instructions are you giving your child? Very simple to do. Mostly I have had parents come back and tell me that 90% of my interactions with my child was instructions. Who wants to receive instructions all day? What connection will build in instruction making? So that's something that you need to be very mindful of. The third thing is when you do give feedback, and parents give a lot of feedback to their children, want at least to give a lot of feedback to their children. How are you giving that feedback? You cut the child to size, right? Are you sarcastic? Many parents are sarcastic when they're giving feedback, right? Because they're already disappointed. They had expectations. You should have done this. You have not done this. They're using sarcasm. They're using irony. They're using disappointed languages of all kinds. There is body language which is sending it out. So the child is receiving all this. The child only can block you. There's nothing that the child can do because they care about your validation so much. Think about that piece, right? Where will you see capability? You'll not see capability, right? Coming out. So are you standing in judgment of your child and hence your image is affected? It's a cyclical model, right? So what is the image of your child? Can you walk it towards capability? Then instead of staying in judgment, can you see them as human? Developing, growing human beings. And can you ensure that you give yourself enough self-care? We get tripped and then children don't know how to handle us. It is difficult to do that. So please give yourself enough self-care. Find those buckets that you constantly empty out. Fill it in. Find your community. Find your tribe. Do something to stay filled and then fill the child. Parents are the biggest ecosystem, whichever school the child goes to. If parent is able to provide this for the child will thrive.
Love that.
Yeah.
I remember I was 7 and I was having one of my moping, stressed out about work and just moping around the house. She walked up to me and she said, Dada, I can see that you have something unresolved. Can you figure it out? Then come talk to us. No, I love that. I was like, oh, okay, I just go in my room.
Yeah, but that space that you've created for her, right? That works. Yeah, so that's, if I had to say one more, I would say that. Does your child have a space to say no in the house? Can they draw boundaries? Not no to what you are saying alone, but no because they don't feel ready, they don't feel prepared. Can they say no is a very important thing in decision making in the future for children to become leaders. That space is generally squeezed out. And especially Asian societies, it's squeezed out. You have to obey.
Nice.
Right.
Yeah. 2 more quick questions. I think one is, has Srija as a parent, now that you are a parent, how has that journey connected with Srija as an educator?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. So I had my son, I think almost 10 years after my journey had started. So it's a much more recent journey. So I say Sparkling Minds is my first baby, right? And my son is my second child. And so one of the things that really works is that I'm able to see him as just him, right? And I have been working with him on, hey, empathy bucket and love language, and that checking in has helped, okay? Otherwise, the relationship would have already gone south because the kind of working hours I keep and all of that stuff, right? And there are times when he's able to tell me things which I don't then take personally. So recently, he was telling me something happened on sports day. I had gone for a conference and I could not be there. They was asking him what happened, and somebody told me he cried and all that stuff. He said, I don't want to tell you because then you try to solve my problem. I said, okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's a very instinctive thing. I'm sorry if it ever felt like I am trying to solve your problem. I genuinely just wanted to understand where you are at. Whenever you feel ready, you tell me. And I'm able to leave it at that because I know the power of letting that be and having those conversations instead of disconnecting. So it has been a boon that I have walked that journey and I've done it with so many people. It just feels like a gift that I'm able to walk with. Yeah, and I think for parents, given the kind of ecosystem that we are in, the tense, anxious, everything is changing around us, being able to live in gratitude with your child is very important. So I'm able to do that on a day-to-day basis with him. I have been in receipt of empathy from him many times. And I know that it's a love trickle that is coming in. Being able to identify that, I feel very grateful to be able to do that. And it's a nice journey.
Love.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think talking about gratitude, I think we are both very grateful for the journey you've taken. I think both as an entrepreneur, as an educator, as someone leading Sparkling Minds, I know there is enough drama that happens on a daily basis. Running school, we probably see one sliver of it. But thank you for taking that weight and taking the journey and for taking us along that journey. I
Thank
think
you.
We are better parents, fathers because of that.
Absolutely.
And I love that you challenge us to a greater, better, higher standard of parenting. And I think we're a more whole, loving, caring family because of the work that Sparkling Minds does.
Yes.
Grateful and thank you so much, Sriya.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This was lovely.
Yeah. Thank you.